Hey guys, I'm back with the second part of this concept. So I'm just gonna choose one of these sketches and take it to the finished illustration. So I'll just give my thoughts on it and go through the process with you guys. And later in the video, I might just go through some of my YouTube comments and give you guys some thoughts and answers to some questions that you guys had. So I hope you guys like the final result. Thank you guys as always for watching, subscribing, and checking out my videos. So yeah, let's go. So I mentioned this in my first part of this series that I did do another little page of explorations, and that's what I'm doing right here. The goal of this was that just since I had a little bit of extra time and the first page came together pretty quickly, I figured I would just use, another hour or so to try some more, kind of push the scale of these designs a little bit further and try a little bit more crazy proportions. And I think a couple of them worked, but for the most part, I think they were just getting too big and too crazy, and it wasn't really the kind of feel I had in mind when I first had the idea for this illustration. But I got some cool ideas, and the benefit of doing like so many designs like this is that you can always, a lot of these designs might work for another idea I have later, or they might inspire another idea or something. Like, you don't have to throw them out just because they don't work for this specific illustration. So I've got my sketch that I chose here, and all I've done before starting the painting is I just blocked in some of the major shadow shapes, and I've decided where the light is coming from in the image. So using those major shadow shapes and trying to create shadows that are interesting and make that main focal point of the island interesting to look at, and make sure that it's strong and it's going to grab your attention. And I'm just filling in a black and white value sketch now and deciding what's going to be the lightest values, what's going to be the darkest values, and making sure that everything is readable and really prioritizing the area around the focal point. And I really want to keep things simple, and I want the read to be very simple, and especially with this kind of subject matter, it's really it's meant to be kind of serene, and I want you to feel the nature, and I want you to imagine this kind of sense of awe in this kind of calm little sheltered lake upon seeing this castle. So that's kind of what I'm thinking, and I want the mood to reflect that, so I'm thinking of that stuff while I'm laying in my values and making sure that I feel like I'm focused and my eye is drawn to the right things, and everything else that's not important, I don't want to pay attention. I don't want to pay that much attention to it. I want to make sure that it's really simple and I only focus on the essentials. So I had a reference for my colors, and it was the only reference I was looking at for my colors, and that's something I recommend doing when you're doing colored paintings. Try and stick to one reference, and don't make it, I find it much harder to try and extrapolate information from a bunch of different references and make it work in yours, because they're all from different sources and different times of day with a different camera exposure, and there's just too many variables that it'll make your image very muddy and all over the place, and it won't feel unified because you're taking your color information from all these different sources that don't match. Stick to one solid reference and try and use what you see and kind of translate it into the context of your image. So for me, I wanted it to be this really simple read of this kind of golden sunset, golden light beaming off this tower on this island, and I wanted it to be really I wanted that to be a really hot spot that is like drawing your eye. The sun is so intense on that tower, it's hitting it directly, so that that light is kind of just going to bleed off the tower into the rest of the image. It's cool to think about what kind of effects that would have in reality and how the light would bleed into the atmosphere, and that's when you see those really cool effects of like bloom, and almost like when a really intense light source is hitting something, it looks like it's glowing. That's kind of the mood I wanted to have, and I had a really great reference of Eileen Donnan Castle in Scotland, which my wife and I actually got to see in person, and we went inside, and it was really, really cool. So that was a huge inspiration for this image. It's also a castle on an island, so I figured since that was an inspiration for the subject and the design, that I could also find a nice mood reference of that very same castle, and just kind of keep that theme going. So I kind of like to, when I'm laying in colors like this, once I've got the first kind of very basic colors laid in, I like to do it in a way that it's like, if you guys have ever done oil painting, it's similar to how you do that, in that I'm just carving out simple shapes of color to just remind myself that this is where, you know, this warmer kind of orange tone is going to be, this is where the shadow sides are going to be, and thinking about them as just more abstract shapes and not actually trying to paint what it is. I'm just trying to think about big and simple shapes. I want it to look good in an abstract way before I actually try to start literally defining things, because then you have a really strong base and it's less scary to get into the details because you already know it's working. This is why I always save, like, always flatten the image and save a duplicate underneath everything, so that if I do screw it up down the line, I can go back to the point where it was working and try and understand why and how I messed up. After that kind of stage, I start adding a little bit of texture and smaller micro shadow shapes, and I like to use like the lasso tool and custom shapes actually to get those kind of smaller cast shadows and really hard edges. Something that always makes work look more professional is having cast shadows and hard shadows. I think a lot of students and people that are just learning digital painting, they kind of tend to over render all the shadows and things get muddy and kind of blend together. There's often a lack of just hard shadows because it can be scary to lay those in because they're so harsh. But if you study enough references and study from life, you will pick up on where those really dark and sharp shadows are. That's often one of my favorite parts of the process too, is having like an idea of the light direction and having kind of an overall atmospheric application of the light, and then going and doing a cast shadow pass where I can really think about where all the shapes are and the major forms and where they're going to be casting hard shadows if the subject is in a direct light source. So think about cast shadows and even incorporate into your design opportunities to create interesting cast shadows. I know it's something that might seem overwhelming to think about at the beginning, and often it happens just as a happy accident. But if you do see an opportunity to have forms overlapping in your design that give opportunity to cast shadows, if forms are casting shadows on themselves, it really grounds the image, and that brings a huge degree of realism, and I think it's missing from a lot of work, especially for beginners. I'm not sure if I've mentioned this before, but something great you can do to improve and have a better understanding of how you're communicating your designs is showing it to non-artists in your life and just asking for their initial reactions, or asking them what they think is the story of the image or what's happening in the image. I often show my wife my work and ask, what do you think's happening here? Or what do you think this thing is? What do you think the story is here? My wife is not an artist, and she doesn't do anything remotely related to what I do. So it's a good opportunity to see kind of how like a typical audience would respond to your designs, and if you're communicating things clear enough. Because often like artists, if you're showing it to other artists, they might be able to see things and get what you're going for just from their own experience as an artist. It's kind of hard to tell if the design is actually successful because they might just be empathizing with you, and subconsciously, if they see something that's not working, they can relate to that, so it might skew their feedback a little bit. And I have to tell my wife, like, to be brutally honest with me if she has no clue what's happening in my image. So that's a good thing you can do, and like show it to your friends or your parents or your significant other and see what they say. And often that kind of instantly tells me major things that I need to change that aren't clear or aren't being communicated properly. While this is wrapping up, I think I'll just go through some of the YouTube comments. I picked some of the top comments and some of the more common ones I saw that maybe I can just address or answer some questions for you guys. So a comment left on my last video, the first part of this series. I was wondering if you're also thinking of how lighting is going to interact with the shapes at this stage. I see some elements are put in shadow and you color each design as a silhouette. So yes and no. I'm kind of thinking about the overall shapes and the overall silhouette of the design mainly, and sometimes I just use things in shadow and create shadow shapes to kind of add a second layer of interest to that design. And usually that comes at the kind of second step. The first step is establishing a very rough silhouette in a small thumbnail, and then I'll go in and I'll start putting in secondary kind of interior shapes. And that's when I can think about things that are going to be in shadow, things that will be recessed into the architecture or extruded out of the architecture. If you see me putting in shadows and stuff, it's just because I'm reminding myself, I'm just using the shadows to define those forms. I'm just using the shadows to help the designs read. Having something of a light value in front of a dark value sometimes can just help push those elements to the design so that it reads better as a sketch. But I'm not necessarily like finalizing the lighting in that stage. I'm just basically exploring shadow shapes and what the possibilities are. Another comment says, it's interesting that you said to focus on design even if your line work, etc. is lacking. Not your typical art advice, which would suggest that you focus on fundamentals first. Yes, fundamentals are key, and I apologize for making that confusing in my last video. I was just talking about the aesthetics of your sketches and not being okay with leaving things really loose and kind of in a very rough thumbnail stage. It's important to not feel the need to finish every sketch and make it look really nice and like something you would put on ArtStation. Just focus on your design, but make sure everything is tempered with those strong fundamentals that are just essential. Please create more artworks with Procreate. This can really help us starting artists with limited tools. Yes, I want to do much more Procreate stuff. I love sketching on my iPad. I'm trying to get better at painting. I've been working on some stuff on Procreate, and it's really awesome that it records everything, and it's a really non-stressful way of recording my designs because it doesn't get all the dead air either. It only records when you actually input, when it registers an input. So yes, I'm going to do more on Procreate. I mainly am just not as proficient with it as Photoshop, so it's like I want to make sure that the stuff I'm sharing is up to a standard that I'm happy with in terms of the quality of my art. So, but yeah, I am practicing and I want to do more with Procreate. So yes. And the last question I had was, and I answered this in pretty good detail, but I thought it was really good couple questions, so I figured I'd put it in this video. You say that you realized you were weak as a designer and your designs needed a lot of work. What was your process like for targeting that area? I feel I'm in the same boat. So last video I spoke about how my designs when I was starting out and learning and trying to become a concept artist, my designs were pretty weak, and I was much too focused on polishing and rendering things and trying to make stuff look really nice and finished. And I had to kind of shift my priorities to be a better designer, because that's what is really the core of being a concept artist is being a strong designer. So the way I improved my designs, I guess I didn't cover this in the last video, but the way I improved my designs is I would seek feedback from people wherever I could get it and just try and push my designs further. And that's what I learned mainly, is that I could push my designs so much further than I thought. There were so many more interesting ideas which came out just in that exercise of taking your initial ideas and kind of pushing them and pushing them and pushing them to the extremes. That process kind of unlocks your unique tastes and your voice as a designer. In the ways that you push things and exaggerate things, you kind of learn what your tendencies are, and you can use those to your advantage. Once you realize that your designs have a certain quality and you really latch onto that, and you are seeing through feedback that your designs are getting better and more interesting and more compelling, then you can kind of latch onto the things that are working and just keep pushing those even further. And also, I just started taking a more academic look at everything I was consuming in terms of the movies I was watching, the video games I was playing, taking a look at designs that I found appealing and really cool, and trying to understand why those are cool and what's interesting about them, and try and use those to inspire my designs, and really trying to be academic and understand why it's working, and how I can implement those same reasons of why it's working into my own stuff to just try and push it to be more professional and more compelling. Looking at stuff more academically and building a visual library of ideas to draw on. It's easy to consume media and play video games and watch movies and you know, play card games and like just see cool stuff, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's sinking in. You really have to like go at it with an academic approach and try and absorb that stuff and really try and look at it closely and think about it. And the second part of this question was about world building. I tend to get trapped in, if I don't know the details like culture, climate, etc., how can I design something? It sounds like you use visual design as a way to learn more about or discover those elements of your world. Is that right? If so, how do you manage designing for a personal project without first knowing hyper specifically what it is you're designing for? Now, okay, everything I'm about to say is my approach, and it's based on my experiences and what works for me, because world building is such a complicated subject and everybody kind of does it differently. When I was at Lightbox, I saw James Gurney speak. If you guys don't know James Gurney, just Google him. He's one of the greatest of all time. I actually met him. I said hi to him and like we had a little chat. He's a really cool guy. So I heard him say that most of world building happens in the audience's mind. So that made a lot of sense to me and resonated with me, and I found that super motivating and inspiring, because that kind of takes the pressure off of feeling like you have to go with the Tolkien approach and construct this massively elaborate and detailed world before you can do anything. You don't have to. You can raise one question at a time and just focus on answering that one question. And if it's a regular part of your life and you're excited about this project and you're doing it regularly, all of those answered questions accumulate, and all of a sudden you have a pretty rich and like well-developed world that you've just been expanding by answering one question at a time. And you don't have to have an answer for everything, and you can just leave little breadcrumbs for the audience to follow to their own conclusions. And in terms of designing things like characters or environments, my approach to just get started is usually very simple, and I try and keep it to 3 main things that I think about. That's just to get me kind of off the ground and just to get the ball rolling and start generating more ideas and bringing up more questions. I might just start an environment by saying, this place is dark, the atmosphere is suffocating, and there's a foreboding or ominous mood about it. And then I'll just start exploring based on that. I'll bring in ingredients that I think support that. So I might start with really obvious and cliche things like dead trees or swamps or whatever, but then I might use those and turn them into a little bit more unique things. So you don't have to have all the answers to get started. You can kind of use the process as a way to bring up those questions for yourself and then just focus on one at a time and answer that, and just let your world build up that way. Something I always like to remind myself is you can read Lord of the Rings or watch the movies and you can not know any of the complex backstories and lore and like mythology and thousands of years that came before the story, and it's still a great story and a great movie, and it's very compelling, and you can get just as much out of it as someone who knows absolutely everything about that IP. You don't need to answer every question, and you don't need to show answers to every question. You can let a lot of it happen in the viewer's mind. Most people that watch Lord of the Rings think Gandalf is just an old man. So now I'm just kind of wrapping things up and adding last minute changes. Like, I changed the design of the castle a little bit to have a wall, like a stone wall, and some towers, and some elements that I took from some of my other designs in the sketching phase. And I just combined a couple ideas just to make sure that the design is as strong as possible. And I'm just getting a little bit nitpicky and adjusting shapes and making sure that I'm happy with all the major shapes that are going on in terms of light and shadow, and making sure that I'm describing the forms. But overall, at this stage, I was pretty happy, and I felt like I saw where the image was going, and I mean, if you blur your eyes at this and the final result, it's pretty damn close, and so the image is pretty set in my brain here, and now I'm just kind of sharpening things up and adding details and thinking about brushstrokes and you know, how I can define those last extra details in a simple way. Alright guys, so that's it. I hope you guys like the end result. Hopefully this kind of process and breaking up the concept into 2 different videos, it works for you guys. So hopefully watching the 2 videos is worth the end result. Please remember to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already and if you like my videos. And just keep giving me your feedback, and I'll try and answer any questions I can in the comments, and maybe I'll start answering a couple comments in each video from now on, just at the end or something. But yeah, thank you guys so much, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.